After being married for over 20 years, my wife suddenly announced she wanted a divorce to chase true love with some 23-year-old trust fund kid. She was willing to walk away without a single cent to her name. I initially assumed she had been brainwashed by those trashy soap operas until my daughter let me in on the secret that her mother thought she had won $50 million. In reality, the winning ticket had been picked based on my birthday and was safely in my daughter's pocket, while the ticket her mother held was only worth $500. My wife had always been obsessed with those cheesy romance novels about billionaire CEOs falling for ordinary girls. She used to stay up all night reading them when she was younger, but lately she had moved on to cringy TikTok series like the one where the president falls for a White House maid. Driven by a desperate need for what she called true love, 40-year-old Ava decided she was done with me, so she could pursue a whirlwind romance with her supposed soulmate. Her target was Tyler Sterling, the 23-year-old heir to the prominent Sterling fortune. She expected me to grovel and beg her to stay while crying like a desperate mess. She never imagined that I would just give her a calm smile and agree to the divorce right then and there. I did not waste a single second before packing up and leaving with our daughter. Later on, once the news broke that I had actually won the $50 million jackpot, she came crawling back to me in tears. She was sobbing and wailing, begging for a second chance, and claiming she would be happy to be my personal maid for the rest of her life. It all started on a Tuesday, while Ava was lounging on the sofa and casually dropped the bomb that she wanted a divorce. I was in the kitchen at the time, finishing up the dinner dishes. It was the middle of winter, and the freezing water was turning my hands a ghostly pale color. When I heard her say those words, I just scowled and wondered what kind of madness she was dealing with today. We had been married for over 2 decades and were the quintessential long-term couple. Even after all those years, she still felt the need to inject some artificial drama into our lives every now and then. It shouldn't have been surprising given her history of being obsessed with ridiculous billionaire romance novels. She had always been addicted to those brainless stories about powerful men and the girls they loved. Nowadays, she was totally addicted to those viral TikTok series about powerful world leaders falling for lowly servants, and she watched them on a constant loop. I dried my hands on a dish towel and walked into the living room to find her sprawled across the couch. She was staring at her phone screen with a glazed expression as she scrolled through one video after another. I asked her what kind of stunt she was pulling this time and if I had done something specific to offend her. I couldn't understand why she was suddenly bringing up divorce out of the blue. Like most couples in our neighborhood, she had made it clear when we first got married that she wasn't going to be my personal maid. She had always been very vocal about her expectations for our life together. For the entirety of our marriage, I was the one working 40 hours a week to provide while also handling all the chores and raising our child. I wasn't even allowed to offer a single word of complaint about the workload. Whenever I showed even a hint of exhaustion, she would immediately weaponize the things I said back when we were dating. She would ask if I was suddenly regretting my decision to take care of her. She would remind me how I had once promised to treat her like royalty regardless of her attitude. All of those sweet things I said in my 20s had been turned into a shield for her bad behavior. Any minor inconvenience in her day resulted in her screaming at me, and she constantly used the threat of divorce as a weapon. It was an exhausting cycle that I had lived with for far too long. In the past, she would at least try to invent a halfway believable reason to justify her dramatic outbursts. I was positive that I hadn't done a single thing lately that could have possibly provoked her to this level of hostility. I couldn't understand why she was being so insistent on ending things right now. Ava didn't seem interested in explaining herself, and she didn't even bother to look up from her phone screen. She kept her eyes on her phone and told me with a sigh of annoyance that she didn't need a reason other than wanting to be done with me. She asked why I needed some grand justification for a simple legal separation. Her only explanation was that she was tired of wasting her life on a loser like me. She spoke with a coldness that I had never truly seen before. She said that if I agreed to the split, she would walk away without the house, the savings, or a single dime of my money. This was the moment I realized something was truly bizarre, because she had always been obsessed with financial security. I looked her straight in the eye and told her that I wouldn't sign anything without a legitimate reason. I was determined to find out what was actually going on behind her back. I reminded her that the laws had changed and that she couldn't just walk out without a mutual agreement. As long as I refused to cooperate, she was stuck in this marriage regardless of her tantrums. My resistance clearly caught her off guard because her expression darkened instantly. She hesitated for a moment before standing up with a look of cold determination, as if she had finally made a choice. She asked if I was truly prepared to hear her reasons out loud as she stood up to face me. She then claimed that her 2 decades with me had been the most miserable years of her entire life. Now that our daughter was an adult, she felt she had every right to chase her own version of romance and joy. Her words felt like a physical blow to the chest and left me momentarily speechless. I struggled to comprehend what she was even talking about when she mentioned finding love. Ava shot me a look of pure disgust, as if I were a piece of garbage she was finally ready to throw out. She seemed to have found a new sense of energy and looked completely liberated by her own cruelty. It was as if she felt a massive weight had been lifted from her shoulders after 20 years of imprisonment. With a cold smirk, she began hurling insults that cut deeper than any physical wound I had ever received. She demanded to know if I had ever provided her with a truly comfortable life during our entire marriage. She pointed out my lack of wealth and ambition while claiming my steady paycheck was my only mediocre achievement. According to her, I was nothing more than a pathetic and worthless man who had failed her. She started comparing our life to her best friend's husband, who supposedly made millions and took his wife on luxury vacations around the world. She complained that I was too cheap to even buy her a designer handbag without making a scene about the price tag. She claimed that she only married me because her parents had forced her into it years ago. She made it very clear that a man like me would never have been her first choice. Her anger only seemed to intensify as she spoke, and she eventually kicked over the trash can next to the coffee table. Scraps of paper and food waste scattered across the rug, while she screamed about how much she hated our life together. Then she turned her venom toward our daughter and called her a clumsy, unattractive brat who did nothing but cry. She claimed that just looking at our child was enough to ruin her mood for the rest of the day. I stood there completely paralyzed and unable to find the words to respond to such blatant cruelty. It had never occurred to me that my wife harbored such a deep-seated hatred for me after all these years. What was even more shocking was that she felt the same way about the daughter she had carried for 9 months. A wave of coldness washed over me as I whispered that she was talking about our own child. Ava erupted into a hysterical scream and shouted that the only reason she ever gave birth was because of my pressure. She insisted that she had never wanted a daughter and that I was welcome to keep her after the divorce. She made it clear that she never wanted to lay eyes on either of us ever again as long as she lived. Anna had never been close to Ava throughout her entire life and preferred to stay glued to my side. I used to assume it was just because I was the more indulgent parent, but now the truth was painfully clear to see. Our daughter had likely sensed her mother's resentment from a very young age and knew she wasn't wanted. She probably grew up knowing that the woman who gave her life never actually wanted her in it. Ava went back to her phone with an expression of pure exhaustion and spite as she ranted about being in her 40s. She claimed she had spent the first half of her life following her parents' orders by marrying a man she never loved. Now she was determined to spend the rest of her life chasing her own happiness and living on her own terms. She reiterated that she didn't want any of our marital assets, as long as I signed the papers immediately. A sudden realization hit me like a lightning bolt, and the pieces of the puzzle finally started to fit together. My face hardened as a surge of uncontrollable rage began to boil in my chest, and I could no longer hold it back. I grit my teeth and asked her if there was another man involved in this sudden decision of hers. I told her that her pursuit of happiness was nothing more than a pathetic excuse for an affair. Ava finally looked up and met my gaze with a defiant stare that confirmed my suspicions. She admitted to the affair without a shred of remorse and asked me what I planned to do about it anyway. She started shouting at me to stop being so old-fashioned and sexist about her personal choices. She claimed that my moral objections were outdated and that she saw absolutely nothing wrong with what she had done. It was as if she believed she was the one being wronged by my disapproval. She argued that her only mistake was the timing of her announcement rather than the act of betrayal itself. She pointed out that she had only been with this new man for a few days compared to the decades she had wasted on me. Her audacity reached a peak when she compared me to an animal for calling her out on her behavior. My vision went dark as a white-hot rage took over my entire body. Before I could even think, my hand connected with her cheek in a stinging slap that echoed through the room. Ava stumbled backward from the force of the blow and clutched her face in utter disbelief as she stared at me. I stood there shaking with my head spinning while the world around me seemed to blur into a haze of static. I had never struck her before in all our years together. My heart was hammering against my ribs so hard that I thought I might collapse right there on the rug. Just as I felt my knees buckle, the front door flew open and Anna came charging into the room. She was covered in tears as she grabbed my arm and begged me to calm down for the sake of my health. She had clearly heard everything that had been said through the walls. I slowly regained my composure and reached out to brush a stray hair from Anna's face as she cried. She was a beautiful girl, even if she still had a bit of that soft baby fat common for her age. I could never understand why Ava was so obsessed with putting her down and making her feel small. To me, it did not matter what the rest of the world thought, because she was the child I had raised with everything I had. Even if she wasn't a supermodel, she was my entire world, and I would always protect her from people like Ava. Anna turned toward her mother with a look that was a painful mix of heartbreak and deep resentment. She cried out that she had always known she wasn't loved, and that her mother refused to even acknowledge her in public. She asked Ava if she really thought a child would want a mother who despised her very existence from the start. Having her secret shame laid bare by her own child caused Ava to absolutely explode with fury at the girl. She screamed at Anna and blamed my parenting for the fact that our daughter finally had the courage to speak up. She called our child a traitor and accused her of siding with a man over her own flesh and blood mother. She then ranted about being a victim of domestic abuse and demanded to know why Anna wasn't comforting her instead. She finished her tirade by calling our daughter an ungrateful little traitor who didn't know her place in this house. Before the words even left her mouth, she raised her hand to strike Anna across the face in a fit of rage. My reflexes kicked in instantly, and I caught her wrist with enough force to make her gasp. I shoved her back with a burst of protective strength that sent her stumbling across the living room floor. I let out a roar of enough that was so loud my own voice began to tremble from the sheer intensity. I told her that she was the one in the wrong and had no right to unleash her venom on her child. I agreed to the divorce on one condition, which was that she had to bring her new boyfriend to the house immediately. I wanted to see if the coward had the balls to face me instead of hiding behind his mistress like a child. I must have looked terrifying in that moment because the air in the room suddenly turned cold as I glared at her. My eyes were bloodshot and the veins were bulging out of my neck as I stood there like a coiled spring. The level of fury I felt was the kind that could drive even the calmest man to do something he would regret. I was ready to defend my family and my dignity at any cost. Ava finally seemed to recognize that she had pushed me too far this time, and she took a cautious step back. She crossed her arms and agreed to call him over, but warned me that if I touched a hair on his head, she would make me regret it. She grabbed her purse and phone before storming out of the house and slamming the door so hard the walls rattled. A heavy silence immediately filled the room in her wake. I looked around at the disaster of our living room, from the trash on the floor to the sobbing girl standing in the corner. I felt a crushing sense of sorrow that made it difficult to even take a deep breath in the empty house. I let out a long sigh and told Anna that none of this was her fault and that I was sorry for being so powerless. I felt like I had failed her as a father by allowing things to get this bad. To my surprise, Anna wiped her eyes and looked at me with a newfound sense of resolve that I had never seen before. She told me that she had spent a long time thinking about their relationship and had finally come to a conclusion. Since her mother didn't see her as a daughter, Anna decided she no longer had any obligation to see Ava as a mother. She was ready to move on from the woman who had caused her so much pain. She promised to work hard in school, so she could eventually take care of me when I got older and couldn't work. Her words were like a warm balm on my wounded spirit and eased the sharp pain that had been lingering in my chest. I took a deep breath and patted her on the head while telling her she was the best thing that ever happened to me. I was proud to have such a compassionate person as my daughter. I couldn't help but shake my head at how quickly our family had crumbled into nothingness after 20 years of effort. Anna went quiet for a moment before her eyes sharpened with a sudden sense of suspicion about her mother's motives. She asked if I found the suddenness of the divorce and the lack of any warning signs to be incredibly strange. It didn't fit with anything we knew about how Ava usually operated. Knowing how much her mother loved money and status, the idea of her walking away with nothing was a major red flag. She was right to be skeptical because Ava had never been the type of person to give up anything without a fight. If she really just wanted a divorce, she could have handled it through a quiet legal process over several months. Instead, she was creating a massive scene and trying to rush the paperwork as fast as possible. It felt like she was trying to escape something or get to something else with an almost desperate level of urgency. I wondered aloud if there was some secret deadline forcing her hand in this matter behind her backs. That was when Anna's face lit up as she suddenly remembered a crucial detail that had slipped her mind earlier. She looked at me with wide eyes, as if she had just found the missing piece of the puzzle. She let out a sharp gasp and reminded me that she had bought a lottery ticket for Ava just the day before. The winning numbers for that specific draw had just been announced earlier that afternoon, and the timing was too perfect to be a coincidence. She dug through her bag and pulled out a crumpled piece of paper while explaining that she had actually bought 2 tickets. One was for her mother, and the other was a ticket she had bought for herself on a whim. She had used Ava's birthday for her mother's ticket and my birthday for her own ticket as a fun little experiment. With a look of pure shock, she told me that the ticket using my birthday numbers had actually hit the jackpot for $50 million. Anna had raced home from school to share the news with both of us, but was met with the sounds of our screaming match instead. We were suddenly looking at a life-changing amount of money in our own hands. She had been standing at the door listening to us tear each other apart, while holding a ticket worth a fortune in her hand. A sudden and terrifying thought occurred to me as I looked at the ticket, and I urgently asked Anna a question. I wanted to know if she had used her mother's phone number for the contact information when she made the purchase. She blinked at me as the realization slowly began to hit her as well. She nodded slowly, and in that instant, every strange thing about Ava's behavior over the last hour suddenly made perfect sense. The notification text for the $50 million win must have gone straight to Ava's phone by mistake. She had obviously checked the results before walking through the door and assumed she was now a multi-millionaire in her own right. She thought she had the winning ticket and was ready to ditch her old life for good. It explained why she was so eager to sign away the house and the savings in exchange for a quick and quiet divorce. She was completely convinced that the $50 million belonged to her, and she didn't want to share a cent of it. I couldn't help but let out a dry laugh at the sheer absurdity of the situation she had created for herself. Her sudden generosity was nothing more than a calculated move to secure what she thought was her private fortune. She was so desperate to leave that she had even confessed to her affair just to ensure I would want her gone immediately. She was playing a high-stakes game to get her freedom before I could find out about the supposed money. What she didn't realize was that the actual winning ticket was sitting in the pocket of the daughter she had just finished insulting. The irony of the entire situation was almost too much for me to process. A genuine smile finally spread across my face as the weight of the earlier anger evaporated into thin air like mist. I pulled Anna into a tight hug and started laughing at the cosmic joke that was being played on Ava. I told my daughter that her mother had absolutely no idea what she had just thrown away for a lie. Anna truly was my lucky charm in more ways than I could have ever imagined. I was now more than happy to give her exactly what she wanted and sign those divorce papers as soon as possible. I was actually looking forward to seeing the man she was willing to destroy her entire life for without a second thought. As expected, Ava showed up at our front door the very next morning with her soulmate in tow to finalize the split. I stood there waiting with my daughter, while curious to see what kind of prize she had found. When a guy walked into the living room, I was momentarily stunned and actually felt a flicker of pity for him. He had deep dark circles under his eyes and looked like he hadn't slept in a week or eaten a proper meal. He could barely stand up straight and seemed to have absolutely no energy left in his exhausted body. He looked like a man who was running on fumes and a lot of regret. It was obvious to me that he had been completely drained of his vitality in every sense of the word. Despite looking like a walking corpse, he tried to act tough by puffing out his chest and giving me a smug grin. He sneered at me and asked how it felt to be a cuckold in my own home after all these years. He seemed to think he was winning some sort of prize by taking my place in Ava's miserable life. He continued his taunts by telling me that only powerful men like him deserve to have women like Ava. He asked me who I thought I was and challenged me to actually do something about the situation if I had the guts. Ava was about to jump in and defend her new boy toy when Anna suddenly beat her to the punch with a scream. My daughter had clearly reached her breaking point with these two and their arrogance. Anna screamed at him to shut his mouth and asked if there was anyone on the entire planet more pathetic than him. She told him that my father was a real man, unlike a fake socialite like him who had never worked for anything. She called him out for being nothing more than a cheap gigolo living off the bank accounts of lonely older women. The look of shock on his face when she said it was absolutely priceless to behold. She told him that he must have really manipulated her mother for her to settle for such a low-life piece of garbage. She advised him to look in a mirror and see how gaunt and hollowed out his body had become lately. She joked that even if he did have money, he probably wouldn't live long enough to spend any of it before he died. She predicted that he would drop dead soon and that nobody would even bother to show up at his funeral. I was honestly shocked by my daughter's outburst because she was usually the most polite and cheerful person I knew in the world. It was my first time hearing her use that kind of language, and every insult was more brutal than the last. It was clear she had reached her limit, but seeing her defend my honor like that filled my heart with warmth. I felt lucky to have her on my side during this mess. Tyler's face twisted into a mask of pure rage as her words hit home, and he lost his temper completely. He lunged toward Anna with his hand, raised to strike her for insulting him in front of everyone. I did not even have to think before my body moved on its own to protect my only child from him. I stepped in front of her and delivered a powerful kick directly into his chest that sent him flying backward. The force of the blow sent him stumbling back several feet, and he barely managed to stay on his legs as he gasped for air. I glared at him and warned the punk that I was still standing and he had better not try touching my daughter again. It didn't escape my notice that Ava had remained completely silent when Tyler tried to hit Anna just seconds before. She was too obsessed with her new boyfriend to care about her own child's safety. However, the moment I fought back, she rushed to his side as if she had been personally attacked by me. She fussed over him with a sickening amount of concern while asking him where it hurt and if he was all right. She didn't even bother to spare a single glance for her own daughter who had almost been assaulted in front of her. She turned her venomous gaze back to me and demanded that I sign the papers immediately. Looking at her in that state made my chest feel heavy with a mix of anger and disbelief at her audacity. She was the one who had destroyed our family with her betrayal, yet she was standing there acting like the victim. She treated me and Anna as if we were the villains in her twisted little fantasy about her new life. I realized then that the old saying about all parents being good was nothing more than a lie told to children. Situations like this prove that some people are simply not equipped to be parents and never should have been. Children have no choice in who brings them into the world, and they're born with a biological need to love their parents. Even after everything that had happened today, Anna's voice still held a faint glimmer of hope as she addressed her mother. She wanted to believe there was still some shred of humanity left in the woman who raised her. She told Ava that this would be the last time she ever referred to her as mother before asking her a final question. She asked if Ava truly wanted nothing to do with her despite having carried her for 9 long months. Every word out of Anna's mouth felt like a knife twisting in my gut because I knew how much she was hurting. She had always been such a sweet and considerate child who deserved so much better than this. She used to wait for us to come home so she could pour us water and rub our shoulders after a long day at work. As she got older, she tried even harder to win her mother's approval while constantly walking on eggshells around her. Unfortunately, no matter how much love Anna gave her mother, Ava always responded with a wall of icy indifference. I had spent years trying to convince Anna that her mother loved her in her own broken way. I used to tell her that her mother just didn't know how to express her feelings and that she shouldn't take it to heart. Looking back now, it was clear that Anna had seen the truth long before I was willing to admit it to myself. Ava didn't just dislike us because she actually felt a deep and visceral hatred for our very existence. We were nothing more than obstacles in the way of a life she thought she deserved. Ava did not show a single ounce of remorse, even as she listened to her daughter's voice tremble with raw emotion. Instead, she looked annoyed and told Anna that she was just the byproduct of a loveless and forced marriage. She spoke as if Anna was a mistake that she had been forced to live with for way too long. It was the most heartless thing I had ever heard a person say to their child. She asked why she should ever want to see a reminder of her own misery and mistakes every single day. She claimed that she had already fulfilled her legal obligations by raising Anna to adulthood and was finally done with her. She told us both that seeing our faces every day made her physically sick to her stomach for years. She even admitted that she had often fantasized about ending both of our lives just to escape her reality. She declared that living with us had been a constant state of torture, and she thanked God that she was finally free of us. Anna started shaking violently, and her face went as white as a sheet while her eyes filled with fresh tears. Her lips moved, but she could not find the strength to say a single word in response to her mother's cruelty. I could feel her world crumbling right there in front of me. My brain felt like it was exploding from the sheer intensity of my anger at how she was treating our daughter. I reached for the glass of water on the coffee table and splashed the entire contents directly into Ava's face to shut her up. I told her to keep her mouth shut and asked her if she actually believed she deserved the title of mother. I had reached my limit with her disgusting behavior and her lack of heart. I demanded to know what gave her the right to look down on a girl who was 10 times the person she would ever be. I informed her that the feeling of disgust was mutual and that we were just as sick of her as she was of us. She might have given birth, but she had never once acted like a real mother who cared about her child's feelings. She had never offered a kind word or any support to her own daughter during her entire life. She was standing there acting like she was the victim when she was the one who had caused all of this pain. While she was still sputtering from the water, I grabbed the divorce papers off the table and demanded a pen to end this. I told her I was going to sign right now and reminded her that she was walking away with absolutely nothing. I made it clear that she would not be getting a single cent from our shared life once I signed. Ava glared at me with her chest heaving as she tried to process the fact that I was actually letting her go. Her face was a twisted mask of fury and humiliation, but she finally reached into her purse for the rest of the documents. She slammed the papers onto the table with a loud thud that echoed through the quiet house. Even after all of that, she still couldn't keep her mouth shut and continued her insults. She sneered that she didn't want my pathetic scrap money anyway, because she was going to be a millionaire soon. She claimed that she had been miserable for years living with a broke loser and that we actually owed her for her wasted youth. She argued that Anna and I were the ones who should be compensating her for the time she spent with us. The level of delusion she was operating under was truly beyond my comprehension at this point. I gave her a cold and hard look while warning her not to push her luck any further today. I told her that since the deal was done, she needed to take her boyfriend and get out of my house immediately. I made it clear that if she stayed a second longer, I wouldn't hesitate to slap her across the face again. I had no more patience for her drama or her insults in front of our daughter. My expression must have finally gotten through to her because she actually fell silent for the first time in an hour. She let out a final snort of disgust and grabbed Tyler by the arm to lead him toward the exit. She slammed the front door so hard it shook the frame as the two of them disappeared into the night together. I finally felt like I could breathe again in my own home without her toxic presence. Once the door was closed, the house became peaceful, and I turned back to Anna to pull her into a tight hug. I told her not to be sad because her mother was the one who was truly losing out on everything today. I reminded her that she was the greatest blessing in my life and that things were going to get better for us. We were finally free from the person who had been dragging us down for years. I managed a small grin and joked that eventually those two would blow through all their money and end up completely broke. I told her that one day we would find them on the side of the road and eat a gourmet meal right in front of them. While it was unlikely that they would actually end up homeless, it was a funny thought that made us both feel a little better. We were ready to start our new life without looking back at them. The mental image of her mother as a beggar was enough to finally make Anna giggle for the first time today. She clung to my arm with a renewed spark in her eyes and reminded me that our lives were about to change forever. She told me that as soon as we cashed that ticket, I would never have to work another day in my life at that miserable office. She was already planning a massive road trip for us to see the entire country together. She added with a mischievous wink that we would document every single luxurious stop on Facebook just so her mother could see what she had missed. It was heartwarming to see her in such high spirits again after everything she had been through this afternoon. I started to let myself dream about what our new life would actually look like with $50 million in the bank. The possibilities for our future were absolutely endless, and we were finally in control. After the government took its share of taxes, we were still looking at roughly $40 million in cold hard cash. I'd spent my entire adult life working myself to the bone and hadn't even managed to save a tiny fraction of that amount. The idea of being a wealthy man was still something my brain struggled to fully comprehend as a reality. I felt like I was living in one of those TikTok dramas that my wife used to watch all day long. My first priority was simple because I wanted to buy a beautiful new house for me and Anna in a much nicer neighborhood. I also wanted to trade in my old junker for a reliable luxury car that wouldn't break down every other month. However, I decided not to quit my job immediately, just in case there was some kind of bureaucratic nightmare with a lottery commission. It felt safer to have a backup plan until the money was actually sitting in my personal bank account. Having a safety net is always a smart move, even when you think you're rich beyond your wildest dreams. Meanwhile, Ava and Tyler were living like every day was their last as they burned through whatever cash Tyler had left in his name. They were traveling all over the country and staying in the most expensive hotels while eating at five-star restaurants every single night. They were buying designer clothes and jewelry as if the money was never going to run out. Since Ava had walked away from our marriage without a penny, every single one of those bills was being footed by Tyler alone. I wondered just how long his trust fund would actually support their reckless and expensive lifestyle before it ran dry. The mandatory waiting period finally came to an end, and I headed to the courthouse with Anna to finalize the legal separation. We were both nervous but excited to finally be done with this chapter of our lives. Ava and Tyler were already waiting in the hallway, and it looked like they were about to burst with excitement for their new life. Their eyes were practically glowing as they anticipated the moment they would finally be legally separated from my boring life. It was incredibly obvious that they believed the $50 million would be theirs to spend the second the judge signed the decree. They were already counting the money that wasn't even theirs to begin with. I looked at Ava and asked one last time if she was absolutely certain about her decision to go through with this. I reminded her that once the ink was dry, there would be no turning back or changing her mind about the assets. She just laughed at me while crossing her arms and looking down her nose at us with an expression of pure arrogance. She claimed that she would never regret leaving a man like me and that she was finally moving on to bigger things. She even went so far as to swear an oath and said that if she ever regretted it, she hoped she would die in a horrific car accident. She warned us never to contact her again or ask her for a single penny once she was rich and famous. I looked at her for a long moment before slowly nodding and agreeing to follow her terms to the letter. I was more than happy to let her walk out of my life and into her own destruction. We both signed the final documents without a second of hesitation, and the legal process was over before noon. Anna and I shared a knowing look as we walked out of the courthouse together while struggling to hide our grins from the cameras. We knew that Ava's fantasy world was about to come crashing down around her ears in a spectacular fashion. The countdown to her realization of the truth had officially begun as we stepped out into the sunshine. Once we were away from the crowds, Ava dropped her icy professional demeanor and let out a triumphant laugh of pure joy. She couldn't contain her smugness any longer and turned around to flaunt her supposed victory in our faces one last time. She announced with a booming voice that she was the winner of the $50 million jackpot from the other day. She looked at us like we were peasants who had just lost the chance of a lifetime by being annoying. She told us she was moving to Europe with Tyler to start her new life as a member of the social elite with her fortune. Tyler chimed in with a sneer while calling us broke losers and telling us to enjoy our miserable little lives in this town. Anna just gave a soft and dry laugh before offering them her mock congratulations for their supposed good luck. It was hilarious to see how confident they were in a total lie that was about to break them. Ava's brow furrowed in confusion because she clearly expected us to be devastated or green with envy at her news. Our lack of a dramatic reaction was clearly bothering her more than she wanted to admit in front of Tyler. She tried to maintain her bravado by claiming we were just pretending not to care about the money. She hissed that it was far too late for us to regret our mistake and that she was gone for good. I gave Anna's sleeve a gentle tug to signal her to stay quiet for now because the best part was still coming. The real show was about to begin, and there was no sense in spoiling the surprise before they got to the bank. I told Ava with a flat voice that since the divorce was final, her life was absolutely none of my business anymore. I reminded her once more to stick to her promise and never contact either of us again as long as she lived. Ava hesitated for a fraction of a second before her arrogant mask snapped back into place with a sneer. She snapped that she had no desire to ever see my face again and told me to take my poor smell somewhere else. With a final huff of indignation, she hooked her arm through Tyler's and strutted away like she had just won a grand prize. We watched them go while knowing exactly where they were headed and what they were about to find. The moment they were out of sight, Anna and I practically sprinted to our car to get started on our own mission. We had already mapped out our route to the lottery headquarters across town to make sure we were first in line. Our goal was to cash the ticket before Ava realized her mistake and try to make some kind of legal claim. We needed to get that money into a private account as quickly as humanly possible before she could interfere. Unlike my ex-wife, I had no intention of telling a single soul about our newfound wealth or our plans for the future. I knew from experience that when you are broke, the world treats you like you are invisible and worthless. However, the moment you have a few million in the bank, every long-lost relative starts appearing out of the woodwork. I had already dealt with enough fake people in my life to know how to keep a secret when it mattered. It always baffled me how something as simple as money could completely alter a person's entire personality and values. I was determined to avoid the drama of distant cousins and old high school friends coming to reconnect with my wallet. To keep things low profile, Anna and I had prepared some disguises before leaving the house to keep our identity hidden. We were taking every precaution to ensure that our win remained a total mystery to the public. We were wearing heavy coats and beanies along with face masks that left almost nothing visible but our eyes in the cold. Luckily, the winter weather made our outfits look perfectly normal to anyone passing by on the sidewalk that morning. If it had been the middle of July, we probably would have been stopped by the police for looking like bank robbers. We hailed an Uber and headed toward the downtown lottery office with our hearts racing with anticipation. I didn't give the driver the actual address of the lottery commission and chose instead to be dropped off at a busy shopping mall blocks away. Neither of us said a word during the ride, as if speaking might somehow jinx our good fortune before it was official. We were both vibrating with nervous energy while clutching the winning ticket, as if it might disappear into thin air. We just wanted to get this over with and start our new lives as soon as possible. In retrospect, we were probably being overly paranoid about the whole thing, as if we were in some kind of spy movie. The driver didn't give us a second glance, and the crowds at the mall were too busy with their own lives to notice us. We followed the directions we had memorized and walked straight into the lottery office to begin the verification. To our amazement, the entire process was incredibly quick, and the staff were very professional with us. Within an hour, the wire transfer had cleared into the private account I had set up just for this occasion. We were looking at a balance of exactly $40 million after all the federal and state taxes had been settled. Anna stared at the bank statement on my phone screen with her eyes wide in total disbelief at the number. She looked up at me with a grin so wide it seemed to split her face in two as she realized we were rich. We both knew that our world had changed forever in the span of a single afternoon, and we were finally safe. The office staff asked if we wanted to go public with a giant novelty check and a photo op for the local news station. I did not even have to think twice before turning them down flat, because I wanted to remain anonymous. I had no interest in becoming a target for every scammer and long-lost relative in the country. I was not about to put a giant target on our backs by advertising our wealth to the general public or anyone else. As we left the building, Anna was already whispering a mile a minute about all the places she wanted to visit on vacation. She was halfway through a list of dream vacation spots when I suddenly spotted two very familiar figures across the street. I quickly pulled her into a nearby cafe to avoid being seen by them while they were busy. I told her to keep her voice down and pointed toward the lottery office entrance where a dramatic scene was unfolding. We grabbed 2 drinks and found a small table by the window so we could watch the drama from a safe distance. We sat there in silence while waiting for the inevitable explosion to happen across the street. Ava and Tyler were strutting toward the building with their heads held high, as if they owned the entire city. They walked in with a level of arrogance that was almost painful to witness, as they practically radiated winner energy to everyone. Ava marched up to the clerk and slammed her crumpled ticket onto the counter with a loud and dramatic thud. She loudly announced to the entire room that she was there to collect her $50 million prize right now. She looked around at the other people in line as if they were beneath her in every possible way. She warned the clerk not to mess up the transaction while Tyler stood behind her with his arms crossed and a smug look. The clerk recognized them immediately since they had probably called several times that morning to brag about their supposed win. He took the ticket and scanned it through the machine while Ava waited with a look of pure triumph on her face. After a few seconds, he looked up and offered her his congratulations with a very professional expression. He confirmed that it was indeed a winning ticket, which caused Ava's face to light up with pure joy as she looked at Tyler. She bragged to him that she had been right about the money all along and that their new life was starting now. However, the clerk's tone shifted as he informed her that the prize amount was not $50 million at all. He told her plainly that the ticket she held was only worth exactly $500 in cash. The news hit Ava like a ton of bricks, and she remained frozen in place for a solid 10 seconds while processing it. Her face turned a deep shade of crimson, and her voice went up several octaves as she screamed that it was impossible. She demanded that the clerk check the ticket again, while insisting that she had received a text message confirming her jackpot. She was starting to cause a scene in the middle of the crowded office as her panic grew. She pulled out her phone and shoved the screen inches from the clerk's face in a desperate attempt to prove him wrong. The staff member let out a tired sigh and explained that the computer system didn't make mistakes like that with ticket numbers. He told her clearly that she had not won the jackpot and that there was nothing he could do to change the outcome. She looked like she was about to have a total nervous breakdown right there at the counter. He advised her to check the numbers one more time and pointed out that several of the digits on her ticket were slightly different. Ava's face went from a bright red to a ghostly white as the reality of her situation finally began to sink in. It was as if she had suddenly realized exactly what had happened with the 2 different tickets Anna had bought. She stood there in silence while the entire room watched her world crumble apart in an instant. She stared back and forth between her phone and the crumpled piece of paper in her hand until her eyes began to tear up. It took a few agonizing minutes for her to accept the undeniable fact that her ticket was worth less than a monthly car payment. Tyler immediately flew into a panic and grabbed Ava by the shoulders while shaking her and demanding to know what was going on. He looked like a man who had just seen his entire future disappear into thin air. He reminded her that she had promised him a life of luxury, including a new mansion and a fleet of expensive sports cars. He sounded less like a loving partner and more like a con artist whose big score had just fallen through at the last second. He was practically hyperventilating as he realized his meal ticket was gone and he was still broke. Ava looked like she had her soul sucked right out of her body and her mouth hung open in a silent scream. Finally, she collapsed onto the floor and began wailing like a wounded animal in the middle of the lobby for everyone to see. She kept sobbing that she didn't understand what had happened and that the text message had specifically promised her the jackpot. She was a complete mess while being surrounded by security guards and curious onlookers who were enjoying the show. Her life had turned into one of those soap operas she loved so much. Suddenly her eyes went wide as she remembered the second ticket that Anna had purchased using my birthday numbers as a joke. She screamed that her daughter must have the real winning ticket and that I had played her for a total fool from the start. Everything finally clicked into place for her, including why I had been so happy to sign the divorce papers without a fight. She realized that the money she had sacrificed everything for was now in the hands of the people she betrayed. She yelled that it all made sense now and that she had been tricked into giving up her share of our marital assets for nothing. Tyler's eyes turned bloodshot with greed as he hauled Ava up by her coat collar and began screaming in her face like a maniac. He didn't care about her feelings or her heartbreak because he only cared about the mansion and car she had promised him. He told her to go find her ex-husband and daughter immediately to get what he considered to be his money. The lottery staff looked at them with pure disgust as the sordid details of their lives were screamed for everyone in the room to hear. It was obvious to everyone that this was just a cheating wife and her deadbeat boyfriend fighting over a prize they didn't even have. They looked like trashy characters from a daytime talk show, and their lack of class was evident to everyone watching. The security guards started moving in to escort them out of the building. Ava started sobbing even harder while realizing that she had walked away from 20 years of stability with absolutely nothing to show for it. She reminded Tyler that she had destroyed her marriage and her reputation specifically so she could be with him and have a new life. She had quite literally gambled her entire future on a single ticket and had lost every single hand in the process. She was now a homeless and penniless divorcee with no one to turn to for help. She asked if he really loved her regardless of the money like he had promised her during their secret affair. Tyler responded by shoving her back onto the hard floor and spitting on the ground in front of her with total contempt. He told her she was a total fool for believing a single word he had said while he thought she was going to be rich. He made it clear that without the $50 million, she was absolutely worthless to him and his future. He asked her why on earth he would want to be with a wrinkled woman in her 40s if she didn't have any money to spend. He insulted her looks and claimed he had wasted his time even being seen with her in public over the last few months. His verbal abuse turned physical as he began kicking and punching her while she was still crying on the ground. He was a vicious animal fueled by the frustration of his lost fortune and his wasted effort. He screamed at her to go get his money from me while claiming that he deserved it as compensation for having to date her. He continued to strike her while she tried to protect her face and begged him to stop hurting her in front of everyone. He was acting like a total lunatic and shouting that the $50 million belonged to him by right of a sacrifice. The scene was absolutely horrific, and several people were filming it on their phones for TikTok. The situation became so violent that the building security team had to intervene and pin Tyler to the floor until he calmed down. The police arrived minutes later to find Ava bleeding on the floor while her soulmate was being hauled away in handcuffs. After taking statements from the witnesses, they asked Ava if she wanted to press charges for domestic assault against him. She looked at the man she had loved just hours ago and saw him for what he really was. Tyler stood there with a cocky smirk while fully expecting her to forgive him because of how obsessed she was with his youth. He assumed he would get off with a slap on the wrist and be back to his old ways by dinner time. He completely underestimated just how vengeful Ava could be when she felt like she had been betrayed by someone she trusted. He didn't realize that Ava only cared about one person in this world, and that was herself. Everything she had done was about maximizing her own comfort and pleasure, and Tyler was no longer useful for that mission. She didn't hesitate for a single second before signing the paperwork to have him hauled off to the local county jail. The woman who had sworn she would die for him was now the one ensuring he would spend the night behind bars. She watched him being led away with a look of pure coldness in her eyes. Later that evening, my phone buzzed with a call from the local police station, and I knew exactly who it was. As soon as I answered, Ava was on the other end, wailing and sobbing as if her entire world had just ended. She called me by my name and told me that Tyler was a piece of garbage who had just used her for her supposed money. She claimed that she finally realized I was the only person who had ever truly loved her for who she was. She begged for my forgiveness and suggested that we get remarried, as if the last 48 hours of betrayal hadn't happened. She promised to be a perfect wife and mother if I would just give her one more chance to come home to us. While she was begging for her old life back, Anna and I were already on an Amtrak train heading toward the coast. I had no intention of ever seeing her face again or letting her back into our lives. The very first thing I did after the $50 million hit my account was send a formal resignation email to my boss. I had been at that firm for a decade while watching my salary and benefits shrink every single year without fail. Between the rising insurance costs and the lack of bonuses, I was making less than when I had first started there. I was officially done being a cog in a machine that did not value my time or my hard work. I could not stand the thought of spending another 8 hours in that soul-crushing office with people who didn't respect me. As a senior employee, I was always the one expected to handle the most difficult clients and stay late for zero extra pay. My boss knew I had a mortgage and a daughter to support, so he used that leverage to treat me like a servant. He assumed I was too scared of losing my health insurance to ever walk away from the abuse. I worked countless weekends and holidays without a single dime of overtime, pay only to get yelled at the moment something went wrong. The only reason I had stayed for so long was to ensure Anna could go to a good college and have a better start. If I had not had a child to think about, I would have burned that bridge years ago and never looked back. Now, for the first time in my life, I was finally free to do whatever I wanted with my time. That is the burden of being a middle-aged man, because you learn to swallow your pride and endure humiliation for the sake of your family. I had spent years gritting my teeth through insults and condescension just to keep the lights on and the food on the table. But with $40 million in the bank, those days of being a doormat were officially over for me. I was never going to let another person talk down to me as long as I lived in this world. Seconds after I hit send on my resignation, my boss left me a frantic and condescending voicemail on my phone. He reminded me that company policy required a 30-day notice and asked if I was really willing to forfeit my annual bonus. He laughed and asked where a man in his late 40s expected to find another job in this current economy. He was still trying to use fear and intimidation to keep me under his thumb like he always had. He told me I should be grateful for the generous opportunity he had given me and call me an ungrateful prick for leaving. I actually laughed out loud as I typed out my response and told him exactly what he could do with his company policy. I informed him in no uncertain terms that I was done being his personal punching bag for his own failures. It felt amazing to finally say the things I had been thinking for a decade of working for him. I asked him who he thought he was kidding with his self-made man persona when everyone knew he was just a fraud. Everyone at the office knew he only had the job because of his father-in-law's connections and massive financial investments. I pointed out that he had never worked a hard day in his life and had no right to lecture me about effort. I told him he was a failure who had spent his career riding on other people's coattails for far too long. I called him out for his blatant sexism and the way he passed over hard-working men for promotions in favor of favorites. I asked him if he was running a legitimate business or just building a personal harem on the company's dime every day. He was a disgusting man who had used his position of power to take advantage of everyone around him for years. I was more than happy to finally call him out on his behavior in front of everyone. I then dropped the ultimate bomb and told him I had years of evidence regarding his numerous workplace affairs with the staff. I told him I would be sending the entire file to his wife so she could see his hard work for herself. I told him that a man like him deserved to lose everything he had and end up alone and forgotten by the world. I was ready to see his entire life fall apart, just like mine had earlier that day. I hit send and immediately blocked his number before he could even attempt to respond to my threats or beg for mercy. The feeling of freedom was intoxicating, and it felt like a massive weight had finally been lifted from my tired chest. No sooner had I blocked my boss than my phone started ringing with another desperate call from Ava at the station. She was hyperventilating between her sobs while begging me to listen to her apology and help her out of jail. She kept wailing about how much she regretted her choices and claimed she would rather be dead than live without me. Anna was sitting next to me on the train and gave me a wicked little grin as she pulled out her phone. She hit play on a recording she had made at the courthouse, and Ava's own arrogant voice filled the quiet compartment. We listened to her oath about never regretting her decision and her wish to be struck by lightning if she did. The recording was perfectly clear, and it captured every word of her hateful speech from just a few hours earlier that day. She had literally wished for a horrific death and a car accident if she ever tried to come back to our lives. These were the very words she had used to mock us while she thought she was a millionaire and we were losers. Now they were coming back to haunt her in the most literal and painful way possible in her hour of need. The recording acted like a physical slap to her face and silenced her manipulative sobbing for a long, intense moment. She realized that we weren't just angry, but we were completely done with her and her toxic presence in our world. When she finally spoke again, her voice was barely a whisper that was broken by more uncontrollable and pathetic sobbing. She knew there was no coming back from the things she had said and the betrayal she had committed. Ava was officially homeless and penniless with no career or friends left to turn to after her public breakdown and arrest. She had quite literally burned every single bridge she had in a single day of greed and arrogance for a lie. Meanwhile, Anna and I caught a flight the next morning to a beautiful tropical resort in Florida to start our vacation. I was finally taking her to see the ocean she had been dreaming about since she was a little girl in school. Having a bank account full of millions meant we could finally experience all the luxuries we had only ever seen on TV. We had a massive 5-course seafood dinner and spent 3 full days at the biggest amusement park in the country. We stayed until the park closed and our legs gave out before heading back to our 5-star hotel suite to rest. It was the kind of childhood Anna deserved, but had never been able to have until this very moment. Ava continued to blow up my phone with desperate messages until I finally decided to change my number for good to get peace. The silence was absolute bliss as we spent the next 6 months traveling across the entire United States in our new car. We saw every national park and major city while making memories that would last us a lifetime together. When we eventually returned home, we felt like entirely different people who were ready for anything in life. Our neighbor filled us in on the horrific details of what had happened to Ava and Tyler while we were away on our trip. It turned out that Tyler was even more of a scumbag than we realized and had been sleeping with dozens of people. He had contracted a serious incurable illness and had unknowingly passed it on to Ava during their short and tragic affair. When she finally received her diagnosis at the clinic, she had a complete and total psychological breakdown from shock. In a fit of blind rage, she grabbed a kitchen knife and stabbed Tyler repeatedly until he stopped breathing on the floor. She tried to flee the scene in a panic, but ran blindly into the busy street without looking for any oncoming traffic. A drunk driver struck her at high speed and killed her instantly right in front of their cheap apartment building in the city. It was a brutal and sudden end for both of them that shocked the entire local community. Every single word of the horrific oath she had sworn at the courthouse had actually come true in the most literal way. I didn't feel a shred of sadness when I heard the news from the neighbor, but only a profound sense of relief. It felt like the universe had finally balanced the scales after all her years of cruelty and her final betrayal of us. I was just glad that I had gotten my daughter away from her before things turned deadly for us. If she had not been so obsessed with my bank balance, I might have been the one who got sick and died with her. She had walked away from a modest but loving home where she was safe and cared for by people who loved her. She traded a lifetime of security for a few weeks of excitement that ended in a graveyard in the middle of nowhere. It was a high price to pay for a fantasy that was never real in the first place for her. If she had just been a decent human being, she would have been part of our $40 million future and our travels. But some people are never satisfied with what they have and always looking for something more in the wrong places in life. Her tragic end was nothing more than the natural consequence of her own greed and her total betrayal of her family. She had made her choice to leave, and the world had responded to her choices with the ultimate price. She threw away her family for money and broke her daughter's heart for a man who did not care about her at all. In the end, she had no fortune and no love and no life left to live in the world she wanted. The greatest tragedy is not being poor, but destroying everything good in your life for someone who is not worth your time. She learned that lesson the hardest way possible while we were off starting our new and happy life together. She had a devoted husband and a wonderful daughter in a home that was filled with potential and warmth for the future. But she was blinded by her own vanity and could not appreciate the man who carried the weight of the world for her. She ignored the daughter who only wanted her love, while choosing instead to chase a mirage of wealth and excitement. She threw away a lifetime of effort for a few moments of pretend luxury and a handsome face. She thought the outside world had better things for her, but she only found sickness and a lonely death in the street. You should never take the people who love you for granted, because the stability you find boring is what others pray for. Life gave her countless opportunities to do the right thing and be happy with what she had in her hands. In the end, she was the only one responsible for throwing her own blessings away for nothing in return.